journey into the quantum realm, wherein here, time is everything.
No, I am the father.
And here we go.
That belongs in a museum.
Are you telling me that you built a time machine? Out of a DeLorean?
You're gonna need a bigger boat.
This is Sparta!
Remember, with great power comes great responsibility.
Dr. Grant, my dear Dr. Sattler, welcome to Jurassic Park.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Easily Entertained. I'm your host, Bryson, and here we talk about all things entertaining. Today we are talking about Antman Quantumania. If you haven't seen it yet, a bit of a spoiler warning, we may talk about some of the stuff that happens here, so you may want to wait until you've seen it to listen to this episode, or maybe you don't care and you want to listen to it anyways. Either way, welcome. So I went and saw Ant-Man on, I think the opening day, actually, on Thursday. And I thought it was pretty good. My initial thoughts are it was pretty decent. I really like Ant-Man as a character. I think Paul Rudd plays him pretty well. I think he's very comedic and it fits for the universe. I was kind of sad we didn't get like Luis in this one because I love his like stories from the other two movies. I don't necessarily care much for Ant-Man and the Wasp. I think it was just a bit sloppy, but I do like Ant-Man as a whole. I think his character is fun and I like how Paul Rudd plays him. And this episode also, just a forewarning, might be a little bit shorter. I am feeling a little bit nasally and gross today. My throat and my nose kind of suck. So we may just have a shorter episode because I'm dying. But I did really like Antman Quantumania. I thought it was pretty decent. I think what I particularly liked, I loved the CGI and kind of weirdness of them being in the quantum realm. I kind of like when the MCU has like the weird looking visuals, so I kind of like Doctor Strange for that kind of stuff because it's all like fractal noise type stuff where things kind of repeat and you get like the weird looking stuff. I just think it is interesting and it really grabs your attention. And so I really love that about this one. It did take a bit of a detach from the other two movies because I feel like the other two, they were very grounded in the current world. Whereas this one, they took like a trip essentially to the quantum realm, not necessarily by choice, but that's where they ended up. They ended up in the quantum realm. And so I do feel like with that, it kind of detached a little bit. It felt a little less grounded in my perspective anyways. I am kind of sad we didn't get any Luis. I said that before because I love his stories and the other ones where he's like, where everyone's like mouthing it. I thought that was just like a clever quirk that they added to those movies. I do think what kind of happened with Ant-Man, because the last one, they overly made it comedic. So much to the point where I felt like they made a lot of the characters just dumb, which I didn't care for. Because I think in the first Ant-Man, especially Scott Lang, they make him like, he's a goofball, but he's also like really smart and he knows what he's doing. He's an expert thief. And so I thought that was interesting. But with Ant-Man and the Wasp, they made him way too comedic and kind of dumbed him down. So they kind of just made it seem like he didn't understand anything that was happening. And I didn't like that they did that. In this one, I feel like they kind of evened it out a little bit. So it's more like the first one where he's very comedic, but he still kind of understands what's going on and he's still like very smart and plans things pretty well. And I did like that aspect about it a lot more than like Ant-Man and the Wasp. And I think the characters were all really good. I thought the acting was really decent. I do love Jonathan Majors as Kang, because he's supposed to be the next big bad. They're going to have like 2 Avengers movies based on Kang. I think it's the Kang Dynasty and something else, I think. But I think he's pretty interesting. And in this first one, he actually, because it's Kang the Conqueror, who's kind of like stuck in the quantum realm, because while, what is her name? Van Dyne, Janet Van Dyne, Hope's mom, who was like the original Wasp. She was stuck in the quantum realm, and if you remember in Ant-Man and the Wasp, they rescued her and brought her back. And so with that, she didn't want them to go and discover the quantum realm because Kang was hiding down there, and he needed the Pym particle to rise back up and be able to start the like multiverse war again, which if you've seen Loki, you kind of understand what that is, because there's like the whole like main sacred timeline, which is what everything is kind of a part of. And then you have branching timelines that Kang does not like because it makes more of his variants, which then fight each other because they can all travel in the multiverse, and then it kind of makes things a bit of a mess. So he wants like one timeline to kind of run everything. But so what kind of was interesting, I expected, like the trailers made it out to seem that Ant-Man, that Scott, was gonna die. I fully expected him to have to sacrifice himself, because the main aspect of this movie is about time, and especially like having lost a lot of time. Because with Scott, he was stuck in the quantum realm, and he kind of lost 5 years with his daughter. And then like he's been in prison a lot of his life, and so he didn't get to see his daughter all that much. And then you have Kang, who's kind of lost his time being stuck in the quantum realm when he really needs to control. He feels like he has to take care of the timeline. And so it kind of gets that parallels between those two characters. But so you kind of figure Scott is going to die because he's going to sacrifice his life so that everyone else can have time, and he's not going to, so that he can prevent Kang from obliterating their timeline. And so I thought it was just interesting. I liked that aspect of it. I do think some things very much could have been better about the film. I think pacing was a little bit off. I think that's been an issue with Marvel more so lately. I think it's kind of been an issue they've had for like the entirety of the franchise, is they kind of let scenes drag on a little bit too long. They go out for a longer time than is really necessary. Usually the point is met, and then they're like, okay, let's keep dragging this out. And you don't really need to be doing that because you've made your point. You can kind of move on to the next scene. And I feel like they kind of did that a lot in this. And there were some scenes I feel like could have been cut out. I like Bill Murray as an actor. I do not think he really needed to be in this movie. He was in it for maybe like 5 minutes. He comes in really quickly and then he's just gone. And I'm like, but why? There wasn't really a necessity for him being in there other than to like lead in and be like, hey, there was this rebellion that Janet kind of led, which made like Kang like try and conquer this world, and then everyone kind of hates her, and he was part, and Bill Murray's character was part of this. And so it was just kind of unnecessary in terms of storytelling. The movie was actually relatively short, I think, as far as Marvel movies go. I think it was only like a little over 2 hours, which I feel like lately we get a lot of the 2.5 hour movies. So it does feel like they narrowed it down a little bit, but they still managed to have those pacing issues, which I feel like just happens a lot. But I don't think it was like too bad. I think the amount of characters they had kind of made it overshadowed a little bit, and they tried to add like all these quirky little characters that they meet along their journey, like all the quantum people, which was so like unnecessary. You get them for like a couple seconds. It's like they're trying to all be comedic, and then they're not really super impactful. Like they're used at the end of the movie where they kind of all come and fight Kang together to stop him from traveling through the timeline. And so I don't know, I didn't care much for that part. I did think overall the movie was pretty interesting. I liked it. From first glance, I was like, this is a pretty good movie. And like thinking about it, I'm like, yeah, there's some flaws in this, but it wasn't so much to the point where I felt like it was unwatchable. It's gotten really bad critics ratings. And I don't know, it's like falling along the same Marvel formula that most things fall under. And so you kind of just have to expect that at this point. But I don't think it was overly bad. I did think like some of the acting, I love Catherine Newton. She's great. She is a really good actor. I did feel like some of her acting was a little overpushed. But I love her. If you ever listen to this for some random reason, Catherine, I'm available. But I did think it was pretty good. I think for the most part, everything was decent about the movie. I did like the CGI was actually fairly decent, which I feel like lately Marvel has some issues with their CGI because they tend to be rushing out these films, which kind of sucks. I think we should be going for more quality, not quantity. I would rather all these movies be spread out over a longer time, which was initially the plan, and then the pandemic kind of faltered that a little bit, so I kind of get why that happened, but I do think they're still a bit rushed, and I think they should be taking some more time and getting more feedback on their stuff so that they can make things better. But it's kind of what it is. They're in the formula way now, and I think to really change, they're gonna have to get experimental. But I think that's where like kind of this Kang stuff comes in, because he's a different kind of villain than what we've had before. We've had some like repeating characters for villains, mainly like Loki. We see Loki a lot in the MCU, and we're going to be seeing more of him, I think, because of his show. And I think he's going to be playing more of a part in helping the like timeline conflict. And so I find that particularly interesting because Kang, he's not like Thanos. Thanos was like an underlying villain most of the time. He was not very prevalent until Infinity War and Endgame. He like was in things, like he was in Guardians of the Galaxy, and he's at like the end of the first two Avengers movies, I think, like just as after credit scenes. And so, you know, he's kind of been like the mastermind behind a lot of this stuff, but he was very like behind the scenes until the very end. Kang seems to be at the forefront of it, which I did find kind of interesting because in Quantumania, this variant of Kang the Conqueror dies. I already mentioned spoilers beforehand, so do not get mad at me. I told you before. But Kang, this variant of him, dies. He does get killed in this. So I was like, wait a second. He's supposed to be the big bad. But then in like after credit scenes, we get like a huge meeting of all the Kang variants. And so it'll be interesting because, as you know, they are bringing him into it more because it's supposed to be like a multiversal conflict, which is like the next phase of the MCU. And so having him out here like that is gonna be interesting, I think, because it's a different way to have the villain, because he's always going to be here. So I'm expecting less of defeats of the villain and more like retreating and possibly the heroes losing, which I think is actually a really good storytelling device. Because if you think about Infinity War, it ended with the villain winning. He got what he wanted. And so we're going to have the same type things where we have movies that follow up and kind of undo what the villain did. But I do think it is interesting to have the villain at the forefront and you know what's happening. You know he's just trying to take over the timelines. He's going to take over the multiverse and make one sacred timeline. Because at like the end of Loki, after He Who Remains dies, the timeline starts branching again. And so what they want is each timeline should be its own thing. And they should erase other kind of stuff. And that's what Kang thinks. And so I think it's going to be interesting to see how they portray that and how he's a much more prominent figure in the MCU compared to Thanos, who was way more behind the scenes. I don't know. I just think it's going to be interesting to see how they do it. It could be good. It could be bad. And a lot of people find this phase of the MCU to be a little bit everywhere, but I think that's kind of the point. The last one, they took 3 phases to get to the end game. Quite literally, that's what the last movie was called. But I do think it's interesting because we have to build up to that again. We're going to have to get to the full Avengers level threats, which Kang is, but it'll be interesting to see how they tie it in, because now we're going to have new characters and new teams that will influence that kind of stuff. So it'll be cool to see how everything grows, because we're very early in this phase of Marvel. I think phase 4, a lot of people felt was like a little jumbled around and didn't affect a lot of grand scale things, which I think was kind of the point. This was the establishing phase, and now I think Quantumania is the first one of phase 5. I think that's what their plan was, or it's the end of phase 4. But either way, it's leading into the next like grand overarching story rather than a bunch of the small stuff. But I personally, I like the small stuff. I think it's interesting to go more in depth in some of those things, but I understand why people don't really care for it. But yeah, I find it interesting, and I'm still a huge Marvel fan. I have 2 Spidey suits, for hell's sake. So, like, I totally get it. I get why people feel a little disappointed, but you had to wait a long time for the last section of the MCU. We're going to have to wait quite a while for this current section. So you kind of just have to be patient and see what Marvel does. And I hope they get more experimental with it. And yeah, I am excited for what comes next. I will definitely be talking about the other Marvel movies as they come out. I'm not sure what the next one is, actually. I know Spider-Verse comes out later this year, but that's not direct MCU. I'm actually not sure what comes out next for direct MCU, so I'm kind of excited. We'll definitely be talking about that stuff. But yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on Antman Quantumania. I think it'll be interesting to see how the rest of the populace thinks it is. I personally liked it. Maybe you liked it, maybe you didn't. That's totally okay. It's all part of personal opinion. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Easily Entertained. If you did, follow us and check us out next time. Yeah, it'll be great. But so anyways, until next time, see you guys. Thank you for listening to Easily Entertained with me, your host, Bryson Olson. If you enjoyed, be sure to tune back in Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Mountain Standard Time to hear all about entertainment. Easily Entertained is available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. And if you want the latest updates on entertainment, join us on social media at Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. And until next time, this is Easily Entertained.